Picture this. It's 1607, and three wooden ships are battling through Atlantic storms, carrying over 100 Englishmen toward an unknown continent. These men are chasing dreams of gold and glory, but what they'll find instead is a nightmare of starvation, disease, and death. Yet somehow from this disaster, they'll create something that will change the world forever. Welcome to the story of Jamestown, England's first permanent settlement in North America and the birthplace of what would become the United States. This is the tale of British Virginia, a colonial experiment that nearly failed spectacularly, but was ultimately saved by an unlikely combination: a Native American princess, a humble plant, and the sheer stubborn determination of a handful of survivors. The dream of gold. In the early 1600s, England was watching Spain grow rich from its American colonies. Spanish conquistadors had plundered gold from the Aztecs and Incas, and English merchants were green with envy. They wanted their own slice of New World wealth. Enter the Virginia Company of London, essentially a group of wealthy investors who pooled their money to fund a colonial venture. Think of it as an early version of a startup, except instead of developing an app, they were trying to develop an entire continent. Their business plan was simple: send colonists to North America, find gold and precious metals, establish profitable trade, and make everyone rich. What could go wrong? On December 20th, 1606, three ships, the Susan Constant, Godspeed, and Discovery, departed England carrying 144 men and boys. Notice I said men and boys. Virtually no women made this first journey, which should have been their first red flag. After 4 grueling months at sea, dodging storms and Spanish warships, they finally spotted the Virginia coast in April 1607. They sailed up a broad river they named the James after King James I, and on May 14, 1607, they established their settlement, Jamestown. The nightmare begins. From day one, everything went wrong. The colonists had chosen possibly the worst location imaginable, a swampy, mosquito-infested peninsula that bred disease. The water was brackish and undrinkable. The land was difficult to farm. The location was chosen primarily because it was easily defensible against potential Spanish attacks. Here's the kicker. About half the colonists were gentlemen, upper-class Englishmen who had never worked with their hands a day in their lives. They came expecting to supervise while others did the digging for gold. Problem was, there wasn't much gold to find, and there weren't enough workers to do the actual survival work. Within months, colonists began dying in horrifying numbers: malaria from the swamps, dysentery from contaminated water, starvation because they were too busy looking for gold to plant enough crops, conflicts with the local Powhatan people who weren't exactly thrilled about uninvited guests. By January 1608, only 38 of the original 104 colonists were still breathing. That's a 63% death rate in just 8 months. To put that in perspective, that's worse mortality than most medieval plagues. But the worst was yet to come. The winter of 1609 to 1610 became known as the Starving Time. Of about 500 colonists in the settlement, only 60 survived until spring. Survivors resorted to eating horses, dogs, cats, rats, and eventually each other. Enter Captain John Smith. Fortunately for Jamestown, one man emerged who actually knew what he was doing: Captain John Smith. This guy was like a 17th century action hero, soldier, explorer, and the only leader tough enough to keep the colony from complete collapse. Smith instituted a simple rule: he who does not work does not eat. Revolutionary concept, apparently. He organized work details, enforced discipline, and most importantly, he established trade relationships with local Native American tribes. It was during one of these trading expeditions that Smith had his famous encounter with Pocahontas. According to Smith's later account, and historians debate its accuracy, he was captured by warriors led by Chief Powhatan. Just as they were about to execute him, Powhatan's daughter Pocahontas, then about 12 years old, threw herself over Smith's body and saved his life. Now let's separate myth from reality here. The Disney version of Pocahontas is pure fantasy. The real Pocahontas, whose actual name was Amanut, was a child when she first met Smith. There was no romantic relationship. Instead, she became a crucial diplomatic bridge between her people and the struggling colonists, bringing food and information that kept Jamestown alive. Unfortunately for Jamestown, Smith was severely injured in a gunpowder accident in 1609 and had to return to England. With their most capable leader gone, the colony spiraled back toward disaster. The miracle plant that saved Virginia. Just when it seemed like Jamestown might be abandoned forever, salvation came from an unexpected source: a plant. John Rolfe, a colonist who had arrived in 1610, began experimenting with tobacco cultivation. Tobacco wasn't new to Europeans. Explorers like Sir Walter Raleigh had brought it back from earlier expeditions, but the local Virginia tobacco was harsh and bitter. Nothing like the sweet tobacco the Spanish were growing in the Caribbean. Rolfe somehow obtained seeds of the sweeter Caribbean variety, possibly through trade, possibly through less legal means, and began crossbreeding experiments. By 1612, he had developed a hybrid that combined the best of both varieties, sweet enough for European tastes, but hardy enough to grow in Virginia's climate. In 1614, Rolfe shipped his first 4 barrels of tobacco to London. The response was immediate and overwhelming. London merchants couldn't get enough of this golden leaf. Suddenly, Virginia had found its cash crop. The transformation was incredible. Colonists who had been starving just years before were now clearing every available piece of land to plant tobacco. They plowed up the streets of Jamestown itself to plant more. Tobacco became so valuable it was literally used as currency. You could buy a horse for 16 pounds of high-quality tobacco. And here's where Pocahontas re-enters our story. In 1614, she married John Rolfe, not Captain Smith, as Hollywood would have you believe. This wasn't just a love story. It was a political alliance that helped secure peace between the English and the Powhatan Confederation, creating the stability Virginia needed to survive. The seeds of America. In 1619, something remarkable happened in Jamestown. The Virginia Company established the House of Burgesses, the first elected legislative assembly in the New World. 22 representatives from various settlements met to advise the governor and create laws for the colony. This might seem like a small thing, but it established a precedent that would echo through American history. The idea that colonists should have a voice in their own governance. Also in 1619, the Virginia Company finally addressed their gender imbalance by shipping over 90 young women as potential wives for the colonists. Prospective husbands paid 120 pounds of tobacco for transportation costs. All 90 women were married within weeks of arrival. But 1619 also marked a darker turning point. A Dutch ship arrived at Jamestown carrying 20 and odd enslaved Africans who were sold to colonists as laborers. Initially, their status was similar to white indentured servants, but over time, racial slavery became entrenched in Virginia society. These Africans worked alongside white indentured servants in the tobacco fields, but there was a crucial difference. White servants worked for a fixed term and could eventually earn freedom, while the Africans found themselves enslaved for life, from company to crown. Despite tobacco's success, the Virginia Company never turned a profit. Constant resupply missions, administrative costs, and ongoing conflicts with Native Americans drained their resources. In 1622, a coordinated Powhatan attack killed over 300 colonists, nearly destroying the colony again. By 1624, the English crown had seen enough. King James I dissolved the Virginia Company and made Virginia a royal colony under direct royal control. The age of corporate colonization was over. The age of imperial control had begun. Out of nearly 10,000 people who had sailed to Virginia since 1607, only about 1,275 were still alive by 1624. But these survivors had accomplished something remarkable. They had established England's first permanent foothold in North America. The legacy of Jamestown. So what saved Virginia from becoming another lost colony like Roanoke? It wasn't superior planning or abundant resources. It was the combination of several key factors. First, strong leadership when it mattered most. Captain John Smith's discipline and Pocahontas' diplomacy bought the colony crucial time. Second, economic innovation. John Rolfe's tobacco experiments gave Virginia a product the world actually wanted to buy. Third, political adaptation. The House of Burgesses created a sense of investment and ownership among colonists. And fourth, sheer bloody-minded persistence. The survivors refused to give up, even when death surrounded them. Jamestown established patterns that would define American development for centuries. The pursuit of economic opportunity, the struggle between different cultures and races, the tension between corporate interests and individual rights, and the gradual development of self-governance. But we can't forget the cost. This success came at the expense of the Powhatan people, whose lands were taken and whose populations were devastated by disease and warfare. It established racial slavery as a cornerstone of colonial society. The success of Jamestown was built on exploitation and violence. The story of early Virginia reminds us that history is messy, complicated, and often tragic. There were no simple heroes or villains, just people trying to survive in impossible circumstances, making choices that would echo through centuries. From those three storm-battered ships that arrived in 1607 to the thriving tobacco colony of the 1620s, Jamestown proved that sometimes the most important victories are simply about refusing to quit. The English experiment in Virginia succeeded not because it was well planned or well executed, but because a few determined people decided that failure was not an option. And from that determination, a new world was born.